It was Halloween night, and Hannah had just returned home after a long evening of trick-or-treating with her younger cousins. She was too old to go door to door herself, but she enjoyed the chaos and laughter that came with escorting the little ones. By the time she got home, her body ached with exhaustion. She threw her costume into the corner, collapsed onto her bed, and drifted off almost instantly. Sometime after midnight, Hannah's eyes fluttered open. At first, she thought she had simply woken up in the middle of the night, but then the heavy realization sank in: her body wouldn't move. Her arms lay pinned at her sides, her legs stiff, and even her tongue felt thick in her mouth. Panic set in. She tried to scream, but only a muffled whimper escaped. That's when she noticed something by the window. A dark shape, tall and still, stood outlined by the weak glow of the streetlight outside. Its head was unnaturally round, glowing faintly orange, like the carved pumpkins she had seen earlier that evening. Hannah blinked, convinced it was just her imagination, but when her eyes refocused, the thing had moved closer. She could now make out the jagged, glowing grin of a jack-o'-lantern carved into its face. Its body was lanky, draped in a tattered black cloak that dragged across the floor as it walked. The pumpkin-headed figure leaned over her, its carved eyes narrowing into sinister slits that seemed alive, as though they could see into her soul. Hannah's heart hammered violently, but she couldn't even turn her head away. The creature bent lower until its glowing smile was inches from her face, and she could smell the sickle-sweet stench of rotting pumpkin flesh. It raised one crooked finger and pressed it against her lips in a shushing gesture. She wanted to scream, to thrash, to break free, but her body betrayed her. In the reflection of the pumpkin's hollow eyes, she saw something horrifying: herself, lying lifeless, her skin pale as death. The figure chuckled, a hollow, echoing sound that reverberated inside her skull. Then, in an instant, it vanished into the darkness of her room. Hannah bolted awake, her body free again. She gasped, drenched in sweat, her heart nearly exploding in her chest. The nightmare had ended, or so she thought. As she sat up, she noticed something wet and sticky on her bedsheet. In the dim moonlight, she saw orange pulp smeared across her blanket. And faintly, from outside her window, she heard the sound of a hollow laugh. Michael had always hated Halloween. He despised the costumes, the decorations, and the eerie stories people told. He thought it was childish nonsense, yet every year he couldn't escape the unease that crept in as October 31st approached. That night, he fell asleep early, determined to ignore the holiday altogether. But sometime in the dead of night, he woke to an unsettling sensation. His eyes opened to the darkness of his bedroom, but his body lay frozen. His chest felt crushed, as though something heavy sat on it, pressing the air from his lungs. His eyes darted wildly, searching for the cause, and then he saw her. At the foot of his bed stood an old woman, hunched and cloaked in rags that swayed without a breeze. Her face was shriveled and twisted, her teeth long and crooked. Her eyes glowed faintly green, and when she smiled, the corners of her mouth stretched unnaturally wide, splitting her face into a grotesque grin. Michael tried to shout, but no sound escaped his throat. The witch shuffled closer, her bare feet dragging across the floor with a scraping noise. With every step, the crushing weight on his chest grew heavier, until he could barely breathe at all. She reached the side of his bed and slowly bent over him, her long hair brushing against his face. The stench of rot and earth filled his nostrils. She whispered in a raspy voice, words he couldn't understand, but that chilled his blood. Then she climbed onto his chest, her clawed hands gripping his shoulders with iron strength. Michael's heart raced, each beat pounding painfully against his ribs. He felt her press her face close to his, her green eyes burning into his own, and he realized she was staring not at him, but into him, as though searching for something inside his soul. Suddenly, she began to laugh, a shrill, crackling sound that echoed in his head. He squeezed his eyes shut, desperate to escape, and when he opened them again, she was gone. He could move. Gasping, Michael sat up, clutching his chest. Relief flooded him, but only for a moment. On the blanket, where she had sat, he saw deep claw marks scorched into the fabric, still glowing faintly green. Olivia loved Halloween. She decorated her house with cobwebs, skeletons, and fake bats, and spent the evening watching horror movies. By the time she finally went to bed, the witching hour was nearing. She fell asleep quickly, her mind buzzing with images from the films. Hours later, she awoke to the familiar paralysis. She couldn't move a muscle, but her eyes rolled toward the corner of her room. A shadowy figure stood there, taller than the door frame, its body unnaturally thin, like stretched darkness. It wore a mask, a plain white mask with hollow eye holes and a wide, painted grin. Olivia's chest tightened, and she tried to convince herself it was just her imagination. But then the figure moved. Its body glided silently across the room until it loomed beside her bed. The mask tilted down to stare at her, the empty eye holes blacker than night. She could feel its gaze boring into her, even though there were no eyes behind the mask. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst. The shadow leaned closer, the painted grin inches from her face. Then it lifted its hand, impossibly long fingers stretching toward her throat. Olivia's breath caught, frozen in terror, as the shadow's touch hovered just above her skin. She could feel the icy cold radiating from its hand, though it hadn't yet touched her. The figure whispered something, but the voice was distorted, like several people speaking at once, some laughing, some screaming. The sound rattled her bones. Then the mask began to crack, spiderweb lines spreading across the white surface. From the cracks seeped black liquid, dripping onto her sheets. The shadow's grin widened, splitting the mask in two, revealing nothing beneath, just a void of endless black. Olivia shut her eyes tightly, and when she opened them again, the figure was gone. She sat up gasping, her body finally free. For a moment, she told herself it was just another episode of sleep paralysis. But when she glanced at her sheets, her stomach dropped. Black stains spread across the fabric, still wet and glistening, as though the shadow's mask had truly bled onto her bed.